All right, we're back, and let's talk about this phrase that I've used before in class, selective optimization with compensation. This phrase is used to describe how a person who maybe has some kind of disability or deficit that's going on can still function really well because they optimize those skills that they do have and they compensate for those that are lacking. So I wanted to focus a little bit when we talk about older people on sleep and driving. Because with each of these things that you can see older people optimizing and compensating for things that change. Now, a common myth is that older people have sleep problems, that they, go to bed and lay there, or that they get up really super early in the morning, or other things. The National Sleep Foundation says, oh no, they get the same amount of sleep as younger people. But they kind of don't. I mean, that's kind of a broad brush to say that they get the same amount of sleep as younger people, because in reality, based on the research, what they found is that older people spend more time in bed. So they go to bed on average earlier than younger people do, and they oftentimes stay in bed longer than younger people do. They take longer to fall asleep than younger people do, and they wake more often during the night. And they oftentimes complain of being drowsy during the daytime. So there are, in fact, sleep changes. Well, it may be that if you add up all the time that an older person is asleep and compare it to all the time that a younger person is asleep, that those two things match. Sleep composition can matter, right? If you sleep a good solid 8 hours where you close your eyes and you literally don't open them up until you wake up in the morning, that may be perceived as more restful than if you have times where you wake up. So what do older people do to compensate for the fact that they spend more time in bed and take longer to fall asleep and so on? Typically, we see that going to bed earlier is one way to compensate for the fact that it may take them longer to fall asleep. They may say, you know what, I know that I need to get X number of hours of sleep, so I'm going to go to bed and I'm going to try and fall asleep. Right? So they may go to bed earlier, or they may stay in bed later in the morning, trying to maybe make up for what they know to have been disrupted sleep. The fact that they take longer to fall asleep is kind of a problem, because they oftentimes have gone to bed earlier hoping to fall asleep, and then they actually solidify the habit of actually not falling directly to sleep. So developing some kind of routine oftentimes will offset that. Right? So you have a sequence of things that you always do, and that help make you sleepier. Older people oftentimes wake up more often because they have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, or maybe they're thirsty or something like that. But that can also be a habit. And so if they can work on that habit, they can compensate for that tendency to want to wake up. They can make it sort of not a rewarding thing for themselves to wake up in the middle of the night. When they do wake up, sometimes people will come partially awake but not get out of bed, not fully wake themselves up, and they can settle back down pretty quickly. And so waking more often is not necessarily going to cause drowsiness in the morning. But older people are much more likely to complain about drowsiness during the daytime than younger people are. And so oftentimes older people will compensate for that by taking a nap. And that's great. If we're older and we don't have kids to watch and we're retired, why not take a nap in the middle of the day? But here's the trap. If you take a nap in the middle of the day, it makes it harder for you to fall asleep at night, right? So the fact that older people are getting the same amount of sleep is measured by, okay, well, how long were you asleep in the daytime during your nap? How many bouts of sleep did you have during the night, even if they were disrupted? And so adding it all together, we're like, hey, they're sleeping the right amount. But a lot of older people do complain about their sleep because they have to do all this compensation for the fact that they're not sleeping as well as they did when they were younger. The best thing I can tell you about that, a lot of the stuff I'm telling you about aging is important to set up when you're younger, is to set up routines when you're younger so that you have really good sleep habits. And that'll help to avoid some of these problems when you're older. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety says people who are over 65 have the fewest accidents of any age group. So that sounds great. They're great drivers, right? Except for maybe not. As people get older, they recognize their reaction times are slowing, that their vision isn't as good as it once was, that they can't turn their neck as well to check traffic, these kinds of things. And so that what you see is them compensating. So they may drive more slowly. They may avoid driving after dark or in bad weather, knowing that, if the car starts to slide on the ice, I might not be able to recover. So I'll just go ahead and avoid bad weather driving. I might stop driving altogether because I realize that, I've had a couple of near misses or something, and I'm starting to realize that I've really slowed down. And so, yeah, they may have the fewest accidents of any group, but it might be because they're compensating in different ways to ensure that they don't end up involved in an accident. Also, I would like to point out with regard to driving, as you know, an older person has a lot more experience driving, they may get themselves into fewer accident-inducing situations as well because they just have more experience. All right, so enough on that. Let's talk a little bit about healthy lifespans. So morbidity is a term that we use to measure the incidence or prevalence of a disease or of all diseases in a population. So when we talk about morbidity, we might talk about morbidity due to a specific disease, or we might talk about just general morbidity, and that would be sort of combining all diseases together. So in the chart that I have on the right, it's combining, any cause, any kind of disease. And so what we're seeing is, the lifespan altogether. And then we're seeing, what portion of the lifespan is likely healthy. And that's in the green part. And then the part where you spend some degree of, being unwell. What we're seeing over time, and this is just since the year 2000, and they're kind of projecting into the future how much they expect it to continue to compress. If this chart went back farther, you would see that the morbidity part would be a larger proportion. First off, the healthy lifespan wouldn't make it all the way to 70. It would only, maybe make it to 50. And then the morbidity part would be, a larger proportion. So we're compressing morbidity is what we're seeing over recent years. What we're doing is shortening the amount of time that a person spends in some degree of illness or infirmity, which is great, right? I mean, you want to spend as much of your life healthy as you can. What we've mostly done to compress morbidity is to postpone chronic and acute illnesses. Chronic illnesses are oftentimes now caught in their very early or even pre-stages. You may have heard this term recently where they say, well, I scored in the pre-diabetic range, or I have pre-hypertension. What the doctors are starting to realize is if we can catch these early signs that a person is starting to have issues, then we can maybe, with some lifestyle changes or maybe with a little bit of medication, we can actually postpone the onset of that illness and all the cascade of things that starts to happen once you have that illness. And so one way that we have shortened the amount of time a person spending ill or infirm is by postponing chronic and acute illnesses. And really, the number one factor that has contributed to that is people's changing lifestyle. People are getting more exercise than they used to, a lot less smoking than used to be done, much healthier food than used to be consumed. I mean, I can tell you back when I was a child that we had never in our lives ever heard of any other kind of lettuce except for iceberg. And now, there are multiple different kinds of lettuces that you can eat. I mean, just a lot of things that, at least here in the U.S., we just didn't know about are normal parts of healthy life now. There are medicines available that weren't available in the past that can help to manage, pre-diabetic, pre-hypertension, manage it so it doesn't move forward. And then there are all sorts of technological aids these days that can really help people to manage their health. One of the most useful ones, I think, are these apps that like every medical system has, where you can access your health records, you can order more of your prescription so you don't run out, you can have email chats with your doctor, or even have video chats. So these are really important improvements that have made it more possible. One of my colleagues did research on people being compliant about doing their annual stool test. Very romantic, but so she developed an app that would remind people when it was coming up time so that they would be more likely to go. And they did find more compliance when you have that kind of like little automated message that comes to you. And so you're more likely to take care of your health related issues. Most elderly are independent and vigorous. So that's really good news. The vast majority of people over the age of 75 are in that healthy lifespan. I said 75 when I meant to say 65. Most people over the age of 65 are still in that healthy, independent, vigorous part of life. And the amount of time that they'll spend not being well will be much smaller than like their grandparents were. All right, now the senses. We've been looking at these same charts throughout the entire lifespan, so let's go ahead and complete the chart finally. So with regard to vision, you'll notice that almost everybody is needing some kind of correction by the time they're over the age of 65. In fact, only about 10% of people over the age of 65 don't need glasses. How does one get into that 10%? I don't know, but some people don't need it, but the vast majority do. Now, some really common vision problems that start to crop up in older age would be the development of cataracts. We have on the left, you can see in her pupil, what you're actually seeing in that picture on the left is that black pupil. You're actually seeing through the nice clear lens. In the one on the right, the lens that's behind the pupil has deposits on it. It's probably like calcium or other kinds of, sometimes it's lipids, depending on what kind of cataract the person has, that deposits on the cataract, on the lens, and that causes cloudiness in the person's vision. The great news, talk about technological age, is that there are terrific lens replacement surgeries now, where not only will they give you a nice clear new lens that you can see through, but now it can accommodate, just like your old, when you were a child or young person, your lens could bend. And so a lot of people after cataract surgery don't even need glasses anymore. Maybe glasses for reading, but other than that, they don't need glasses for walking around. And that's like, wow, that's amazing. Now, glaucoma is a disease where pressure starts to build up in the eyeball and pushes back on the back of the eyeball and ultimately damages the optic nerve and ultimately really results in blindness. I think this is the number one cause of blindness that occurs in adulthood. There are other causes that can happen congenitally, but of those that happen later on, this is the number one cause. And, there are surgical things that they can do to try and relieve the pressure. But that's the reason why, if you have ever been asked to have your eyes dilated during a vision test, that's what they're checking for. And they also do a puff of air on your eyeball, and it doesn't seem like anything happened, but that's actually measuring the pressure. Macular degeneration is a disease where the very point of fixation, the part of your eye, on the back of your eye in your retina, the part that is used to actually look specifically at whatever you're really looking at, that part starts to break down. And so you become blind exactly in your point of fixation. And so you can still see the things that are around on the outside of it, but you can't see the very thing that you're trying to look at the hardest. And so ultimately that can cause blindness as well. Now, with hearing, we've been seeing across the lifespan that hearing decreases across adulthood. And so by the time we're in our, over 65 age, almost everybody has some degree of hearing loss. There are lots of different hearing aids and things on the market that are available, but a lot of times older people don't like the hearing aid because if you think about as you start losing your hearing, you oftentimes start detaching from the conversation. You stop attending to what everybody else is talking about because you really can't make everything out. And so you just start kind of detaching, and you're kind of buffered from all the background noise because you can't hear very well. So you don't hear, dishes clattering in the kitchen or the people in the neighboring table talking or, cars driving by. You don't hear all that stuff. So it's not distracting you at all. When a person puts in a hearing aid, it amplifies everything. It doesn't just amplify the things that they want to hear. And so now all of a sudden they can hear all that background noise, and they have to go back to what everybody with normal hearing has to do their whole lives, which is ignore the irrelevant stuff and focus in on just the part that you're trying to pay attention to. It's almost worse to take a period of time where you're like, no, I don't need a hearing aid. No, I don't need it, because you've gone through this period where you didn't have to hear all that background noise. Now you hear it and you're like, this is too punishing. These hearing aids don't work right. And a lot of times don't want to wear them. So we do know from research on selective attention that older people always do, it's part of development that it becomes harder to decide what to pay attention to and what to ignore. So that's already a struggle as we get older. And so now if you add in that you went through a period of time where you didn't have to hear a bunch of background noise, and now you're hearing it, it can just be too overwhelmingly punishing. And the person's just like, I don't want to do this. So it's one of the things that makes it really important that as a person starts to notice that they're saying what a lot, or they're mishearing words. And my grandma used to ask me, what did you mean by, and she'll say some thing that I didn't say. And I'm like, I didn't I didn't say that. And I go reflect back on what I say. Oh, see, she heard something that sounded kind of like it and it doesn't make sense in the context of what she thought I said. Um, luckily she would ask me, right? Like sometimes older people will just detach and say, forget it. I don't know what you guys are talking about. Um, Sometimes younger speakers know that the older person can't hear very well, so they'll sort of lean in close to them and talk like right in their face, or they'll yell, or they'll use really super simple words because you can't hear me, and it comes off as very much of a put down, that kind of elder speak. So the good news is that when older people have positive relationships with the younger generations, they're less likely to internalize the stereotypes. Oh, you're older, you can't hear, you must be doddering, you must not understand, those kinds of things. They're less likely to internalize those stereotypes. And so having positive relationships with like your grandkids and things like that are really beneficial for older people. Smell. So smell had enjoyed a pretty nice plateau across adulthood where, people could distinguish odors pretty well, but it starts to decline really rapidly after 65. And so an older person may need more perfume in order to notice it, or may complain that coffee doesn't smell as good as it used to, or might say that coffee doesn't taste as good as it used to because they're not getting the smell component of the flavor. So those are signs that the person's sense of smell may be going down. Other signs that it might be going down is that maybe they're not smelling something that's rotting in their own garbage can in the kitchen or other kinds of things like that. That one's a little iffy because a lot of us get sensory adaptation. So if like the thing starts kind of semi-rotting and then rotting a little bit more, it's just sort of growing on us and we might not notice it either. But these are kinds of things that an older person, they oftentimes will complain about flavor, and they'll oftentimes complain about things not smelling as good as they used to. Like, oh, this fabric softener must not be working. I don't really smell it. That kind of thing. Now, I mentioned before that the centenarians are the largest growth group right now. And so let's talk about some of the lifestyle factors that are associated with making it to 100 and doing it successfully. Well, you'll just have to memorize this surprising piece of information that all the stuff we've talked about throughout adulthood are the things that seem to be important for helping us to live our longest lives. Having a healthy diet, getting plenty of exercise, being connected to our family and our community, and having meaningful work. Now, I just wanted to spend a second talking about that meaningful work component. It doesn't have to be paid work. It could absolutely be volunteer work. Just feeling like you're contributing, and that generativity motive is still present in older adulthood. And so feeling meaningful, feeling like you're contributing, that's the important thing. And then having that family and community support is super important as a person's going through, potentially some health issues and other, loss of family members and other kinds of things that happen as part of natural adulthood, later adulthood in particular. Having those buffers really help us to successfully navigate through those periods. So not a lot of surprise in the lifestyle factors that are associated with living to 100, but just a reiteration of what you already know is super important for a healthy life in general. All right, well, that concludes our biosocial discussion. I will see you next in the cognitive chapter.